Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. Today we're taking a look at a pair of Swiss SIG experimental prototype semi-auto rifles. In the front here we have a model of 1924, and in the back a model of 1925, which was developed from the 1924. This was actually the first series of rifles first series of semi-auto rifles that SIG developed after World War I. I guess it took them a little while to get into that game, but they did decide to. Both of these were developed by a fellow named Pál Királyi, whose name I've probably butchered, originally Hungarian-born, and spent a lot of time working for SIG, and really developed a whole lot of different semi and full auto weapons for SIG. So there are a number of very significant differences between these two guns. If nothing else, the 1924 doesn't even appear to be a completed prototype, but still a work in progress. And the 1924 has a charging handle on the bottom of the action here, and it is a gas-operated gun, where the 1925 and the SIG KE9 series that would follow these guns were all recoil-operated. So they made some very significant changes in the basic operating mechanism of the gun. However, they both do use rotating bolts, and there is some similarity in the bolt mechanisms. Why don't we go ahead and take a closer look at these. We'll start with the 24 and then move on to the 25 and check out the internals. Looking closely at this 1924 rifle, it's pretty clear that this was still a work in progress. You'll notice most of the gun is in the white, but the sights were taken off of probably a model of 1911 rifle or carbine. So the sights are blued. The barrel is not, the action is not. The stock here looks like it's still a work in progress. The stock in general is actually fairly crudely carved, especially for a Swiss rifle. And you can see some things like these lines that suggest they weren't actually finished. Obviously they hadn't put on an upper handguard when this rifle was stopped where it was. Our charging handle is down here. You can actually see part of the gas piston there. So that's how the rifle cycles. There's a gas port up here somewhere. We can actually see the operating rod right here on the left side. So that's cycling back and forth. And then we have a rotating bolt mechanism. Now, one of the interesting facts with the 24 and 25 prototypes, and this actually carries over to the KE9 rifles, is that the bolt head is actually kind of free-floating when it's not being actively pushed back or pulled forward. So if I pull the charging handle, the bolt then kind of sits loose. It's interesting that it was not strictly controlled by the mechanism. So you can see our locking lugs here on the bolt. This is a rotating bolt mechanism. Right in there, you can see the recesses that they lock into. Pull the charging handle back. What it does is pull this bolt sleeve back, which then forces the bolt to rotate. Just like that. And then pulls it all the way back. These rifles did use detachable box magazines. I believe this is a 10-round magazine. These rifles were also made in a couple of different calibers. This one appears to be 30 caliber. I suspect it's in 7.5 Swiss. The 1925 that we'll look at next is actually an 8mm Mauser. Early Swiss rifles are always known for their really good machining and their somewhat overly complex nature. This is a really good example of, in development, they were even more complex. They've got this sliding double lug assembly on here to lock the magazines in place, far more complex than it actually needs to be. And they would, of course, not surprisingly, get rid of this in favor of simpler systems later on. But, can you imagine having to actually machine those and add them to every magazine? That's a lot of work. You can see the locking bar for the magazine right down in here. By the way, this lever is our hold open or a bolt release. This rifle does lock open on an empty magazine. So if I cycle it all the way open, it doesn't want to drop unless I hit this, and then I can let it down smoothly with the charging handle. So there were some modern elements to this rifle. It did lock open. rotating bolt is a good design, one that would certainly carry over. Now, SIG, I don't know why, but for whatever reason, they decided to abandon the gas operating system. And when they went to the 1925 rifles, they changed to a short recoil system. The 1925 here is another SIG in-house prototype. These never went into any sort of significant production. This one is serial number 6, quite possibly done in the same serial number range as the 1924 guns, which would suggest only a couple of them were ever made. Now, it does share the same style of box magazine, although at this point, it's only been this long, and they have decided to go to a much simpler magazine catch mechanism. So the 1925 retains still a rotating bolt locking system. They've gotten rid of the 3 sets of sequential lugs, and they've gone to just 1 row of locking lugs here. And the bolt is still kind of free traveling when it's not being immediately pushed or pulled by the bolt carrier, which is kind of unusual. Now, they also went to a recoil-operated system for the gun. So this is a pretty complex system here. So this outer sleeve is just a covering for the barrel. The barrel itself is here in the center, and it reciprocates back and forth. I can actually show you that reciprocation up close and in detail because this also happens to be a takedown rifle. It's pretty cool. So if I push this button in, I can then rotate the whole action, pull it out. There we go. Now my bolt is going to come out the front, and here is the back end. So this barrel travels this far, a little over a 1/4 inch, call it 8 millimeters, 7 millimeters, something like that. And it does actually rotate freely in the barrel sleeve when it's loose. Now you can clearly see our locking recesses right here. You can see that the barrel was threaded into this trunnion. This is, of course, an experimental gun, so it looks like it was, they would probably make this trunnion a little bit deeper next time or on a production style of this gun to fully cover those barrel threads. And then we have this interrupted thread here that locks the barrel assembly onto the receiver. Now I can pull out the bolt and bolt carrier assembly there, and also the recoil spring. This actually has a smaller recoil spring than you might expect. So if you've already watched the video on the KE9 rifles, you may recognize this. If you haven't, you may want to go check it out. The cam cuts into the side of the bolt here are actually very reminiscent of the KE9. Now, this 1925 gun did evolve into the KE9, so there's good reason for there to be this similarity. This is a hammer-fired gun. We've got our firing pin in the back there. So there's not a whole lot else to describe on here. We have a rotating bolt. We have our bolt carrier. The inside of the receiver of this rifle is kind of ludicrously complicated. We've got these extra set of guide rails for the bolt. Inside, there's the inside of the receiver. This is far, far from being just a simple tube receiver. There is a hammer firing mechanism back here. Of course, we have our magazine catch, magazine well. All right, one last thing I do want to show you. With a short recoil gun, you do need a mainspring to push on the bolt, and then you also need a spring to force the barrel back into position. On this guy, this cam here inside the front of the barrel is actually spring-loaded. I can move it just a little bit. That is what pushes the barrel back into position during the follow-up from each shot. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Certainly not the type of rifles we get to see every day. Both of these, in fact, came from the SIG factory collection. They sold off a bunch of their duplicates a number of years ago, so we ended up with some guns like this out in the public sector. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out the other videos I have on some of the later developments in SIG prototype rifles. And thanks for watching.